December 1937. The world stood on the edge of a global war. In eastern China, one city was about to experience one of the darkest chapters in modern history. That city was Nanjing, then the capital of China. After months of fierce fighting, the Imperial Japanese Army surrounded the city. Chinese forces, exhausted and outnumbered, struggled to defend it. Many civilians believed surrender would bring peace. Instead, it brought terror. When Japanese troops entered Nanjing on the 13th of December 1937, military discipline largely collapsed. Over the next 6 weeks, countless civilians and surrendered soldiers were killed. Homes were looted, entire neighborhoods burned, and widespread atrocities were committed against the city's population. Families hid in basements, temples, and abandoned buildings, hoping the violence would pass them by. Many never emerged. Yet amid the horror, a small group of foreign missionaries, doctors, and businesspeople refused to flee. Led by John Rabe, they created the Nanking Safety Zone. Using little more than courage and diplomacy, they sheltered hundreds of thousands of civilians inside schools, churches, and refugee camps. Every day, they faced armed soldiers while trying to protect strangers. They documented what they witnessed in diaries, photographs, and reports that would later become vital historical evidence. When the violence finally subsided, historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of people had been killed, while many others endured unimaginable suffering. Exact figures remain the subject of historical research and debate, but the scale of the tragedy is widely recognized. The scars of Nanjing did not disappear when the guns fell silent. For survivors, the memories lasted a lifetime. For historians, the massacre became a warning about what can happen when hatred, militarism, and the breakdown of discipline overwhelm humanity. Today, memorials stand where streets once ran with fear, reminding visitors that history is not only a record of victories and defeats, it is also a record of human choices. The story of Nanjing asks a question that every generation must answer. How do ordinary people become capable of extraordinary cruelty? Because history has shown that the greatest danger in war is not only the weapons, but the moment people stop seeing one another as human. September 1941. The world was engulfed in the flames of World War II. But in northern Russia, then part of the Soviet Union, an entire city was about to face one of the longest and deadliest sieges in history. That city was Leningrad. As the German army, supported by Finnish forces to the north, closed in, nearly 3 million civilians found themselves trapped. Instead of storming the city immediately, the German command chose another strategy. Starve it. Railroads were cut. Roads were destroyed. Food warehouses burned. Winter arrived early, and with it came temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius. Electricity disappeared. Running water stopped. Homes became frozen prisons. Soon, the daily bread ration for many civilians dropped to just 125 grams, a small piece of dark bread made not only from flour, but also from sawdust and other fillers. Parents skipped meals so their children could eat. Children searched bombed buildings for scraps of food. Pets vanished from the streets. Then birds disappeared. Then even the glue from wallpaper was boiled into soup. People collapsed where they stood, too weak to continue walking. Yet the bombing never stopped. Artillery shells struck hospitals, schools, and apartment blocks. Every trip outside could be your last. Still, the city refused to surrender. When the great Lake Ladoga froze solid, Soviet drivers created what became known as the Road of Life. Truck drivers crossed the frozen lake under constant artillery, fire, and air attacks, delivering food into the city and evacuating children and the elderly. Many trucks never reached the other side. The ice cracked beneath them. Entire convoys disappeared into the freezing water. But they kept driving. Inside Leningrad, musicians prepared for an extraordinary act of defiance. In August 1942, despite widespread starvation, surviving members of the city's orchestra performed Symphony No. 7, Leningrad. The performance was broadcast through loudspeakers, not only to inspire the people inside the city, but so the German soldiers outside the lines could hear that Leningrad was still alive. After 872 days, the siege was finally broken. Historians estimate that more than 1 million civilians died, most from starvation rather than bullets. Entire families disappeared. Whole neighborhoods became silent. Yet the city never surrendered. The Siege of Leningrad remains one of history's starkest reminders that war is not fought only by soldiers. Sometimes, the greatest battles are fought by ordinary people trying to survive one more day. And sometimes, the strongest act of resistance is simply refusing to give up. 216 BC. The mighty Roman Republic believed itself unstoppable. Its armies had conquered lands, crushed rebellions, and spread fear across the ancient world. But one man was about to teach Rome the true meaning of terror. His name was Hannibal. Years earlier, he had crossed the Alps with war elephants, a march so impossible it seemed madness. Many of his men died in snow and hunger, but the survivors reached Italy, and war followed. Rome was furious. So, in the summer of 216 BC, Rome gathered one of the largest armies it had ever assembled, nearly 80,000 soldiers. Their goal was simple: destroy Hannibal once and for all. The battlefield was near the village of Cannae. Hannibal had fewer men, outnumbered, surrounded by enemies, but he had a plan no one saw coming. He placed his weakest troops in the center and his strongest on the wings. When the Romans attacked, the center slowly bent backward, looking like it was collapsing. The Romans thought victory was near. They pushed harder, deeper, further into the trap. Then Hannibal's cavalry struck. They crushed the Roman horsemen and attacked from behind. At the same time, Hannibal's strongest infantry closed in from the sides. The Romans were surrounded, completely trapped. What followed was not a battle. It was a massacre. Packed so tightly they could barely move, Roman soldiers suffocated standing up. Others were stabbed where they stood, unable to lift their shields. For hours, the killing continued. By nightfall, over 50,000 Romans were dead. Some ancient sources claim the blood soaked the earth so deeply that horses slipped in it. Senators, generals, nobles, all gone. It was one of the greatest defeats in Roman history. Rome panicked. Many believed the city itself would fall next. But Hannibal never marched on Rome. Instead, he left behind a lesson that military leaders still study today: the perfect encirclement. Even modern generals call it the double envelopment. At Cannae, Hannibal proved something terrifying. You don't need the biggest army to win. Sometimes, you just need your enemy to believe they already have. Winter, 1942. The world was already drowning in war, but in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, something darker was about to unfold. Adolf Hitler wanted the city for one reason: its name. It belonged to Joseph Stalin, and taking it would break Soviet morale. But Stalingrad would become his greatest mistake. The German Sixth Army marched in like conquerors. Bombers turned the city into rubble. Entire neighborhoods vanished in firestorms. Tens of thousands of civilians died in days. But the ruins became a trap. The Soviets had one order: not one step back. Soldiers who retreated could be shot by their own side. There was no escape. So they fought in the rubble, room by room, floor by floor, sometimes hand to hand. One building changed hands 15 times in a single week. The soldiers called it Rattenkrieg, rat war. Men crawled through broken walls, sewers, and blood-soaked basements, hunting each other like animals. Snipers became legends. Among them was Vasily Zaitsev, who turned killing into survival, picking off enemy officers one by one. Then winter came, and with it, death. The Germans were unprepared. Temperatures dropped below -30 degrees. Frostbite took fingers, toes, and lives. Food vanished. Horses were eaten, then dogs. Then leather belts were boiled for soup. But the real nightmare had just begun. In November 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus, surrounding over 300,000 German soldiers. Hitler ordered them to hold, no retreat. So they starved. Men froze where they stood. Wounded soldiers begged for bullets instead of bandages. Some went mad from hunger. By February 1943, the once proud Sixth Army surrendered. Out of 300,000 men, only around 90,000 were captured alive, and fewer than 6,000 would ever return home. Over 2 million people died in the Battle of Stalingrad. It was the bloodiest battle in human history, and it changed the war forever. Because Stalingrad proved one terrifying truth. Sometimes, the deadliest weapon in war isn't a gun. It's a city that refuses to fall. For 1,000 years, one city stood unconquered: Constantinople. It was the heart of the Byzantine Empire, protected by walls so strong they had crushed invaders for centuries. But in 1453, a young sultan came with a dream and an army. His name was Mehmed II. He was only 21 years old, but he was obsessed with one goal: take Constantinople or die trying. Facing him was Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, ruler of a dying empire. He had barely 7,000 defenders. Mehmed had over 80,000 soldiers. And then came the weapon that changed everything: massive cannons, the largest the world had ever seen. One was so huge it took hundreds of men and oxen to move it. When it fired, the earth shook. For 53 days, the Ottoman cannons pounded the ancient walls. Day and night, the defenders patched the cracks with stone, wood, even their own bodies. Priests prayed in churches. Soldiers bled on the walls. But Mehmed had another plan. The Byzantines blocked the harbor with a giant iron chain, thinking their navy was safe. So Mehmed did the impossible: he dragged his ships over land. 70 ships, rolled on greased logs, moved across hills, and dropped into the harbor behind the city. The defenders woke up trapped. On May 29, the final assault began. Wave after wave of Ottoman soldiers crashed against the walls. Arrows darkened the sky. Blood ran through the streets. Emperor Constantine removed his royal insignia and charged into battle like an ordinary soldier. He was never seen again. By sunrise, the city had fallen. Ottoman troops stormed into the great Hagia Sophia, where thousands of civilians had taken refuge. The screams inside those walls would mark the end of an age. Constantinople became Istanbul. The Byzantine Empire was gone forever. For Europe, it was a nightmare. For the Ottomans, it was destiny fulfilled. And for history, it was the moment the last breath of Rome finally ended. Because sometimes, an empire doesn't die slowly. Sometimes it dies in a single night of fire, steel, and silence. For over a century, two superpowers fought for control of the ancient world: Roman Republic and Carthage. Their hatred was legendary. It began with the Punic War's brutal conflicts that shook the Mediterranean. Carthage gave Rome its greatest nightmare: the brilliant general Hannibal, who marched elephants across the Alps and slaughtered Roman armies. Rome never forgot. And Rome never forgave. By 149 BC, Carthage was weakened, but still standing. Rome saw this as unfinished business. So they came with one goal: erase Carthage forever. The siege lasted 3 years. Inside the city, famine spread. Families starved. Children cried for food that no longer existed. Yet the people refused to surrender. They melted gold and silver to make weapons. Women cut off their hair to weave ropes for catapults. Every street became a battlefield. Then in 146 BC, Roman forces under General Scipio Aemilianus broke through the walls. What followed was 6 days of horror. Street by street, house by house, the Romans slaughtered everyone in their path. Fires consumed entire neighborhoods. Smoke covered the sky. Thousands of civilians locked themselves inside the Temple of Eshmun, choosing flames over slavery. When it ended, over 50,000 survivors were dragged away in chains. The city that once rivaled Rome was gone. Its walls torn down, its buildings reduced to ash, its people scattered. Legend says Rome salted the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. Historians debate that part, but the truth is darker. They didn't just destroy a city, they destroyed a civilization. Scipio himself stood in the ruins and wept, fearing one day Rome might suffer the same fate. And centuries later, his fear would echo through history, because in war, victory is sometimes just survival. And survival often comes at the price of mercy. In the 13th century, there was one name that made entire kingdoms tremble: Genghis Khan. He did not ask for surrender. He demanded it. And if you refused, your world ended. By 1219, the Mongol Empire had become a machine of war. swallowing cities across Asia. But one betrayal would unleash one of the darkest massacres in history. The wealthy Khwarezmian Empire had insulted Genghis Khan. He had sent merchants for peace, but the governor accused them of spying and executed them. Then the Shah humiliated his messengers. To most rulers, this was politics. To Genghis Khan, it was war. What followed was not an invasion. It was annihilation. The Mongols moved faster than any army in history. They crossed deserts thought impossible, appearing like ghosts at city walls. One by one, the great cities fell. At Bukhara, Genghis entered the city's grand mosque and stood before the people. He said, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Then the slaughter began. At Samarkand, tens of thousands were killed. Skilled craftsmen were spared, not out of mercy, but because the Mongols needed them. Everyone else faced the sword. But the darkest moment came at Urgench. The city fought harder than expected. Enraged, the Mongols ordered mass execution. Some chronicles claim every soldier was assigned dozens of civilians to kill. The river beside the city ran red with blood. The Shah fled, hunted across his collapsing empire, until he died alone on an island in the Caspian Sea. Within 2 years, one of the most powerful empires on earth had vanished. The Mongols left behind smoking ruins, mountains of skulls, and a message the world would never forget. Resistance meant extinction. Historians estimate millions died in that campaign alone. And the terrifying truth? Genghis Khan didn't see himself as evil. He believed he was destiny. Because sometimes, in history, the greatest conquerors are remembered not for what they built, but for what they erased. Imagine being taken from your mother at the age of 7. Not because you were kidnapped, but because your government demanded it. This was the brutal reality in ancient Sparta. In Sparta, boys were not raised to be sons. They were raised to become weapons. The system was called the agoj, one of the harshest military training programs in human history. The moment a boy turned 7, he was ripped away from his family and thrown into a world of pain, hunger, and violence. They were beaten to toughen them, starved to teach survival, forced to steal food, but if they got caught, they were punished not for stealing, but for failing. At 12 years old, they were given only one cloak for the entire year. No shoes, no blankets. They slept on reeds they cut by hand from riverbanks. But it got darker. At night, some were sent into the wilderness alone. Others were chosen for the Crypteia Sparta's secret police. Their mission? Hunt down and kill enslaved people called helots who looked too strong, too smart, or too rebellious. This wasn't war against armies. It was terror used as control. By 20, these boys became soldiers. By 30, full citizens. Their lives belonged to Sparta. And then came the battle that would make them immortal, the Battle of Thermopylae. When the mighty Persian Empire invaded Greece with hundreds of thousands of men, only 300 Spartans, led by King Leonidas I, stood at the narrow pass. For 3 days they fought like monsters of war, holding back an army that should have crushed them instantly. But betrayal changed everything. A Greek traitor revealed a hidden path around the mountain. Surrounded, Leonidas ordered most of the Greek army to retreat. He and his 300 stayed behind, knowing death was certain. They fought until their spears broke, then with swords, then with bare hands. When it was over, the Persians had won, but Sparta had become legend. Their story raises one terrifying question. How much humanity must be sacrificed to create the perfect warrior? Because in Sparta, weakness wasn't just hated, it was erased. In the 14th century, when kings measured power in armies, one man measured it in gold. His name was Mansa Musa, the richest man to ever live. But his story wasn't just about wealth. It was about legacy. Born in the powerful Mali Empire, Mansa Musa inherited a kingdom already rich in gold. But he had a vision bigger than riches. In 1324, he began a journey that would shock the world, a pilgrimage to Mecca. He didn't travel alone. Imagine this: 60,000 men walking across the burning Sahara, 12,000 servants dressed in silk, 100 camels, each carrying over 300 pounds of pure gold. Wherever he stopped, he gave gold away freely to the poor, to leaders, to strangers. When he arrived in Cairo, his generosity was so massive it crashed the economy. Gold became less valuable for over 10 years. Historians still talk about it today. But Mansa Musa's greatest treasure wasn't the gold, it was knowledge. On his way back, he brought scholars, architects, and books to Mali. He transformed the city of Timbuktu into one of the greatest centers of learning in the world. At a time when much of the world ignored Africa, Mansa Musa proved that greatness, wisdom, and wealth could rise from the heart of the continent. His empire became legendary, so legendary that European maps drew him holding a giant gold nugget. But here's the question. If a man this powerful once walked the earth, why do so few know his name today? History remembers conquerors, but sometimes the richest legacy is the one that builds, not destroys.